Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, the insect lord Zelanus invaded the labyrinth, ambushed, and defeated Zegion, then set his sights on capturing the insect queen EP123. To protect his comrades, Diablo made a dramatic entrance. Although he couldn't defeat Zelanus, he could ensure he wouldn't lose, all while buying time to find a weakness in Zelanus' abilities. However, things took a sharp turn when Zelanus, irritated by Diablo, mockingly referred to Rimuru as nothing more than a lowly slime. This remark filled the entire labyrinth with killing intent, and even Zegion, who had been lying on the ground receiving treatment from Pico and Gracia, miraculously stood up again out of sheer fury. In this episode, the father-son duel between Zegion and Zelanus is about to unfold. So, let's get started. Upon hearing Zegion's unwavering declaration of victory, Dino couldn't help but smile. In his mind, this was a battle Zegion had no chance of winning, yet Zegion confidently made such an audacious statement as if it were a given. Oddly enough, that absurd self-assurance brightened Dino's mood, so he handed over his beloved sword, the mythical level greatsword Huga, to Zegion. Dino sincerely encouraged Zegion, telling him to quickly defeat Zelanus so that Dino could finally relax. At that moment, Dino thought he heard a voice mockingly remind him that he hadn't done anything at all. Naturally, Dino ignored it without a second thought. Zegion nodded, then took Huga in one hand, slinging it over his back. In that instant, Huga radiated a brilliant light, transforming into wings of light that merged with Zegion. It marked the birth of Zegion's new power, Kazuha, the collapsing wings. Dino was left dumbfounded, grumbling that despite having carried Huga for so long, the weapon had never once acknowledged him as its master. It seemed Huga couldn't tolerate Dino's lazy and unmotivated nature. Ignoring Dino's complaints, Zegion walked toward the battlefield, stopping next to Diablo. At that moment, Diablo was seething with rage, ready to strike Zelanus. Zegion's appearance, accompanied by a simple statement that he would take Diablo's place, was enough to calm Diablo down. Diablo warned Zegion that Zelanus had insulted Rimuru-sama and therefore could not be forgiven. Zegion agreed that Zelanus was beyond pardon and promised to deal with the enemy. Knowing that Zegion never made promises he couldn't keep, Diablo nodded in approval. With that, the baton was passed, and the battle between father and son began. Zelanus, however, felt no sense of danger. He had already defeated Zegion once, so now he appeared completely at ease. If Zegion and Diablo had teamed up against him, it might have been troublesome, but the fact that Zegion intended to fight him alone made Zelanus think his child was simply foolish. Zelanus understood that killing Zegion within the labyrinth would be pointless since Zegion would just be revived. However, if he used his Devastator virus to devour Zegion alive, while Zegion's soul might escape and eventually revive, Zelanus could still absorb Zegion's power and reclaim that strength for himself. In fact, Ramirez and the others were deeply worried about whether someone devoured by skills could even be revived inside the labyrinth. Since no one had ever tested it, the outcome remained uncertain. Out of fear of this worst-case scenario, they couldn't afford to experiment with it lightly. Of course, since Zegion was his son, Zelanus still hoped to recruit him if possible, aiding in his quest to become the new creator god. But if Zegion insisted on being his enemy, Zelanus wouldn't hesitate to eliminate him. After all, he still had EP123. By using her as the mother, Zelanus could create new offspring, then pit them against each other and absorb their powers. To become stronger, Zelanus would stop at nothing, even if it meant devouring his own child standing before him. Zelanus coldly offered Zegion another chance, telling him to swear loyalty and serve under him. Just like he had offered Zes an empty promise before, he dangled the temptation of the next creator god's throne before Zegion. However, before Zelanus could even finish his proposal, Zegion flatly rejected it, stating that he already had his own god to serve, Rimuru-sama. Unsurprisingly, Zelanus decided to kill Zegion on the spot. If his opponent had been Diablo, using a big move might have exposed him to a counterattack. But since his foe was his own son Zegion, based on their previous encounter, Zelanus felt no need for extra caution. Pretending to throw a left punch, he transformed his arm into a black mist at the last second before touching Zegion. That was the Devastator virus, a dark, gluttonous entity that devoured everything it touched. As expected, the black mist tightly enveloped Zegion, but strangely, Zegion wasn't consumed as predicted. His body was shrouded in battle aura, and the moment the Devastator virus made contact with it, it was completely neutralized. Zelanus momentarily panicked, then quickly examined Zegion, noticing that his entire body was glowing with the same ultimate metal, hyrocane, as Zelanus himself, radiating a rainbow-colored brilliance. Zegion's power had swelled to the point that even Zelanus could no longer ignore him as a threat. Diablo, witnessing this, let out a delighted laugh, remarking that it seemed Zegion had also unlocked the gate. Zegion responded that their god, Rimuru-sama, had always bestowed love and mercy upon even the smallest of his servants. Diablo was pleased with Zegion's answer but remained slightly concerned. As if sensing Diablo's worry, Zegion assured him that he wouldn't be foolish enough to be consumed by this power. At that moment, Zegion took a step forward, and his aura shook the very ground, causing the layers of the labyrinth to tremble. Pico, who had been watching, was shocked and asked Dino what this incredible power was. However, since Pico, the watcher of this world, didn't know, it was even more unlikely that the perpetually lazy Dino would have any clue. Still, being shameless, Dino quietly backed up a few steps to stand next to Diablo, hoping to figure out what was going on. But Diablo coldly kicked him aside, calling him a shameless fool and telling him to watch quietly without interrupting. With no choice but to retreat, Dino let out a resigned sigh. Dino's comrades, Pico, Gracia, and Mai Furuki, all reacted with disgust and embarrassment at Dino's behavior. Dino could only complain to himself, lamenting that friendship truly seemed like a fleeting, unreliable thing. The scene shifted to Ramorous, where everyone was watching the battle between Zegion and Zelanus, completely confused and unable to comprehend what was happening before their eyes. Even after absorbing the power of Huga, Zegion's existence points had only reached 8 million, which was still far below Zelanus's level. Yet the reality was the opposite. Zegion wasn't backing down and was gradually overpowering his opponent. At that moment, Benimaru suddenly realized something and exclaimed that Zegion must have also gained access to a mysterious power. Ramorous, curious, asked what kind of power Benimaru meant, but he couldn't provide a clear answer. He vaguely sensed that it was a power Rimuru-sama had lent to them. Inside Rimuru, there seemed to be an entity named Seal. The last time Benimaru used Prominence Acceleration against Malim, Seal had given him power, which had caused the attack to be far more powerful than expected, reaching the level of true dragons. However, the aftermath had severely damaged Benimaru's body. The price of using Imaginary Collapse, a technique even Rimuru couldn't fully control, had been greater than anticipated. The injuries Benimaru sustained couldn't be healed by regular recovery potions or magic, which prevented him from returning to the battlefield immediately. Looking at Zegion now, Benimaru couldn't help but feel worried. The reason was simple. Unlike Benimaru, who had borrowed that power briefly, Zegion had recklessly enveloped himself in this immense power, using it continuously to fight Zelanus. Even a brief use of that power had caused Benimaru severe backlash. Prolonged use would have unimaginable consequences. Benimaru remained silent, knowing he could only place his trust in Zegion's ability to win. Shifting back to Zelanus, he was shaken by the unexpected power his son was displaying. The same unease he had felt during his battle with Diablo crept over him again. Forcing himself to stay calm, Zelanus still believed that Zegion wasn't yet a real threat. Zelanus, however, was being extremely cautious, and he sensed that there had to be some underlying reason behind Zegion's strange power. Maintaining such intensity would surely place a significant burden on Zegion's body. For Zelanus, it was just a matter of fighting conservatively and slowly dragging out the battle, waiting for Zegion to collapse on his own. Once that happened, he could investigate the source of Zegion's power. With that in mind, Zelanus calmly engaged in a monotonous exchange of attacks, while Zegion remained undeterred. Both were locked in a mechanical repetition of attacks and defenses, with neither letting their guard down. Zelanus extended his silver filaments into spikes, thrusting them toward Zegion. In response, Zegion swung Kazuha, his wings that could sever the bonds between particles, quickly vibrating and deflecting Zelanus's filaments. For a brief moment, Zelanus's face flashed with surprise. Zegion seized the opportunity to launch a punch, though Zelanus easily dodged it. The blow grazed him, but it wasn't enough to even scratch his ultimate metal exoskeleton, or so Zelanus had confidently thought. Zelanus sneered at Zegion's arrogance, but Zegion, with a hint of contempt, responded that the one who was truly laughable was Zelanus. He pointed out that using such insignificant techniques to try and delay the battle was futile and would only hasten Zelanus's destruction. Zelanus was taken aback by Zegion's words. Unlike Diablo, Zegion was not the type to boast meaninglessly. Just as Zelanus was about to retort, a sharp pain suddenly struck him. Zegion calmly explained that this was his skill, Veldora-style killing art, Void Fist. It was a punch that compressed energy into the fist, creating a strike capable of delivering fatal damage. Even the slightest touch could transmit the energy and cause devastating harm. Though such a move seemed impossible, for someone like Zegion, who excelled in time-space manipulation, it was not mere fantasy. Zegion only needed to make contact with part of his opponent's body to transmit the energy. He had embedded the destructive energy of imaginary collapse into his fist and delivered it to Zelanus, who had believed he had dodged the blow. The destructive force quickly spread, rippling through Zelanus's body and wreaking immense havoc within him. Zelanus roared in fury, his eyes blazing red with anger. For a being of his stature, standing at the pinnacle of existence, this was a humiliation beyond measure. To be pushed into a corner by the son he had once underestimated filled him with uncontrollable rage. It was as if he were burning from within, consumed by a fire of fury with no outlet. Zegion, however, remained cold and composed as usual. He remarked that Zelanus's emotional outburst on the battlefield was a sign of immaturity. These calm words were followed by a relentless counterattack. Unlike Zelanus, Zegion's strength continued to grow. His punches were now overwhelmingly powerful, tearing through the sky and shattering the earth. His speed had also surpassed that of Apito's Godspeed domain. Zelanus, though still a formidable opponent, found himself gradually overwhelmed by Zegion's attacks, which seemed almost divine in their force. The reason behind Zegion's incredible onslaught lay in his ability to circulate the energy of imaginary collapse within his body, as if it were his own blood. It was an extremely dangerous maneuver, one that could easily result in his own destruction, or even the destruction of the world, if not controlled properly. On the other hand, Zelanus, now forced to go on the offensive, found himself struggling to keep up. As Zegion's attacks intensified, Zelanus's defenses crumbled. What had once been an evenly matched battle quickly turned as Zegion's speed surpassed Zelanus's. Gradually, Zelanus began to be struck by Zegion's punches, kicks, and other blows. Eventually, the balance was completely shattered. Zegion unleashed a flurry of blows, pummeling, kicking, breaking, impaling, throwing, and slamming Zelanus, giving him no chance to retaliate. The fight had become a one-sided display of sheer violence, with Zegion, now the master of destruction, demonstrating his unmatched power. Zelanus shouted in disbelief, unable to comprehend what was happening to him. His mind descended into chaos, overwhelmed by the relentless onslaught. Zegion, meanwhile, stopped and stood tall, gazing down at Zelanus. He felt no hesitation or sentimentality for his father. Zegion was not that naive. Long ago, he and Apito had fled to the central world because Zelanus had treated them as disposable pawns. Though Zegion did not seek revenge, the current situation was a matter of fate. He understood that despite inflicting such damage, it would not be fatal for Zelanus. Given time, Zelanus would recover. Knowing this, Zegion prepared for a final blow, intending to unleash his full power, Dimension Storm, a force capable of reducing all existence to nothing. Zelanus had lost the strength to stop Zegion. His entire exoskeleton was shattered and torn apart, his limbs severed. With what little energy remained, Zelanus pleaded for Zegion to wait. Yet, the cold and unyielding Zegion remained unmoved. Zelanus insisted that things were not as Zegion believed. He admitted his defeat, that much was true, but claimed he had one last gift for Zegion. What Zelanus wished to entrust to Zegion was his everything, the ultimate skill lord of life. Since the power of Zelanus' offsprings could become his own, the reverse was also true, but only at the moment of Zelanus' death or annihilation. For Zelanus, having now admitted defeat, this was the moment to pass on the highest authority of the insect lord, much like a coronation for the new creator god. Zegion coldly dismissed Zelanus' words, calling them pointless. He stated that his body already belonged to his god, Rimuru-sama. Indeed, Zegion had no desire to inherit the title of insect lord. His only duties were to protect the labyrinth, await Rimuru-sama's return, and crush Zelanus' ambitions. Zelanus laughed contentedly, saying Zegion could do as he wished, but the transfer had already been set in motion. He expressed his satisfaction, acknowledging that Zegion had surpassed him, fulfilling the ambition he himself could never achieve. This became Zelanus' final words. Using the power of the Lord of Life to sustain his life, Zelanus ended the curse and severed the chain of his legacy. Though death does not absolve all sins, Zegion hoped his foolish father might find peace. He forgave Zelanus. Standing beside him, Apito silently prayed, and with that, the long and burdensome link between father and son was cleanly severed. In the command center, no one could find words to speak. Even Gobta, who had been excitedly cheering at the beginning, grew silent. Ranga curled up with his tail tucked between his legs. Everyone had been terrified by the cold and terrifying power Zegion had displayed. Ramrus murmured quietly, saying Zegion was far too frightening, and Benimru nodded in agreement, his mind in turmoil. Zegion had used that power for an extended period with no visible consequences, while Benimru had been left in shambles after just a moment's use of the same power. Benimru knew he could never wield imaginary collapse for so long and so intensely. The battle they had just witnessed seemed to defy reality. When Ramrus asked Benimru if he could defeat Zegion, though reluctant to admit it, the proud Benimru had no choice but to acknowledge that, at least in his current state, he couldn't win against Zegion. Meanwhile, the operator monitoring the existence points was left speechless as Zegion's power reached an astonishing 68,889,143. Dino, too, was baffled and unsure how to process what had just unfolded, but he quickly shrugged it off, figuring that when in doubt, blaming Rimuru was always a safe bet. Diablo was extremely excited, and the classic phrase, as expected of Rimuru-sama, once again echoed throughout the labyrinth. Diablo was utterly convinced of Rimuru-sama's greatness. Diablo had reached a conclusion. Even when Rimuru-sama encountered and saved Zegion long ago, he had already anticipated this outcome at this moment. His words only left Dino more confused. Everything happening with Zegion certainly seemed to be related to Rimuru, but Dino desperately wanted to know the details. When Diablo entered his usual mode of praising Rimuru-sama, he would turn into a talkative, unstoppable monologue machine. Seeing him in this state, Dino seized the opportunity and cautiously asked if Diablo could explain what had just occurred. However, Diablo, despite his non-stop chatter, suddenly became expressionless when hearing Dino's question. He coldly responded that Dino was an idiot and that he had no intention of sharing this joy with anyone. The truth was, Diablo didn't want to reveal Rimuru-sama's secrets. After all, it involved Rimuru-sama's imaginary collapse energy, a power only accessible to those who had established a soul corridor connection with Rimuru-sama and had unlocked the gate. But this energy was terrifying and dangerous. One wrong step could lead to self-destruction. Given that Rimuru-sama was not currently present, using this power recklessly was practically suicidal. So, when Diablo saw Zegion circulating this energy within his body, he momentarily doubted reality but quickly developed a theory. How was Zegion still unharmed? The only possible answer Diablo could think of was that part of Zegion's body was composed of Rimuru-sama's cells. When Rimuru had first encountered the injured Zegion, he had used his omnipotent cells to heal Zegion's wounds. Diablo believed that Rimuru-sama had foreseen this moment and had deliberately given Zegion his cells. If that were true, everything made perfect sense. Now, all that was left for Diablo was the task he enjoyed most: praising Rimuru-sama endlessly. Of course, this theory was partly correct and partly wrong. Zegion had indeed survived after this battle because of Rimuru's cells and a stroke of luck, but when Rimuru initially saved Zegion, he hadn't planned so far ahead. However, just as everyone was beginning to relax, an unexpected figure appeared in front of Zelanus's corpse. The familiar skill Infinite Eater once again bared its malicious fangs. Alright, that's all for this video. There are a few key points we need to highlight. First, the voice that Dino heard. While the book doesn't specify exactly who it was, there are only two possible candidates, Seal and Rimuru. Based on the tone, which was mostly mocking and sarcastic, it seems more likely that it was Rimuru speaking to Dino in their usual bantering way. This might suggest that Rimuru and Seal are already present in this scene, considering both are beings capable of jumping across different times and spaces. Second, there's the insect race. The author's depiction of this race is very much aligned with animalistic traits. For instance, Zelanus's intention to reproduce with his daughter Peliad and his desire to kidnap Apito stem from similar biological instincts. Additionally, once Zegion proved himself as the stronger being, Zelanus didn't hesitate to relinquish his power, which reflects the social structure of animal kingdoms. Lastly, Zegion's mastery of imaginary collapse is important to note. While having Rimuru's cells is a significant reason for his success, given that Seal's power already enveloped the battlefield, it was inevitable that Zegion wouldn't fail. From this battle, we can also see that compared to world-class beings like Zelanus, Rimuru's power is overwhelming and unmatched. Zegion practically brutalized Zelanus in a one-sided fight. In our next episode, although the crisis in the labyrinth seems to be over with the defeat of Zelanus, it's far from resolved. Vega's appearance disrupts everyone's plans once again, and a cornered Vega may have desperate moves up his sleeve. Diablo will continue to torment Vega, and Dino will also reveal his true strength. The next episode will be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.